Winning Blueprint presents.
In the lab room.
Well, it was St. Patrick's Day on Sunday. This is my first time seeing you since then. I am feeling a little lucky, and so I thought I'd just don a little bit of the green for you. Welcome. You're in the lab room. I'm your host, Lou. Thank you for joining me. And what can I say? Second week of free agency, things have slowed down considerably, which you would expect. I mean, a lot of the guys that were hot on the market now gone. Couple of stories to talk to you about, though, that happened over the course of the weekend and into the early stages of this week. And so let's discuss them quickly and move on. Jake Long, after a 7-day physical, no, I'm kidding. After an extensive physical in St. Louis and mulling over possibly going back to Miami, he decides to sign with the St. Louis Rams. They sold him on the team concept and the direction of that franchise, more so than the Dolphins were able to. Jake Long is now a St. Louis Ram. I think it's a great move for the Rams. I think the Dolphins were kind of skeptical about Jake Long and his health, and was his play starting to decline. They weren't really sure, and so I don't think they were willing to spend the type of money that the Rams were. It's interesting because I was hearing that another team had offered Jake Long more money than what the Rams had offered him, and they came into the fray a little bit later, and I'm not quite sure if I recall who the team was. I want to say it was the Patriots that came in at the last second and really tried to steal him away from the Rams. Jake Long decided, I think I really like it here. My wife likes it here. I like the direction that they're going in. And so he decided to sign with the St. Louis Rams. Big pickup for the Rams. I think this is a fresh start for Jake Long. He needed that, a breath of fresh air. I thought they were starting to strangle him in Miami with a lot of the talks of him not playing up to the potential that he showed in his first 2-3 seasons in the league. And so I think that he really needed to just get away from all that criticism and just start over, start anew. And here it is, a team starving for a left tackle, a guy that can anchor this line down. Jake Long can do that. And so I think it's a win-win for both sides. Jake Long is now the left tackle of the St. Louis Rams. You look at another huge move that happened at the later stages of the week. Don't know if we actually had a chance to talk about it or not. But Greg Jennings, now a Minnesota Viking. This one was a little surprising because Rick Spielman, the GM of the Minnesota Vikings, he really made it a point of emphasis to let everyone know, hey, we're not spending a lot of money in free agency. We're not targeting a big play receiver. We're not looking to spend a lot of money. We're going to allocate all of our resources to the draft. And so when I heard that Greg Jennings was visiting the Minnesota Vikings, I said, that's interesting. And then 24 hours later, he's signing a deal. So there you have it. The Vikings kind of let everyone off of their trail. No, we're not going in that direction. Kind of had everyone sniffing in a different direction. And then after things settled down in free agency, after a lot of the big money deals were commenced, they said, hey, why don't you come on in? Let's talk. Let's see what you're looking for. What's your ballpark figure? And then they signed him up. And it's funny because Greg Jennings, if he wanted more money, could have actually stayed in Green Bay. He actually left some money on the table because he's making about nine and a half per in Minnesota, but the Packers were offering $10 million per season. But he had already made up his mind. He didn't want to be in Green Bay. He wanted to move on. He sold his house, put it on the market. He didn't want to be there anymore. He had already moved on mentally from Green Bay. And so I think Minnesota was going to be his option. That was the only place I think that he had to land. And luckily enough for him, It worked out. He's now a Minnesota Viking. Huge move for the Vikings. They need a number 1 in the worst way. They need a number 2, a number 3, a number 4. You get my point. They need a lot of receivers. But this is a good starting point. This is a great foundation. They got a good receiver. Now they need to build upon that, and they're going to probably do that in the draft. So you look at some other teams that were very active over the weekend into the early stages of this week. First team that comes to mind is the Oakland Raiders. I think they're switching to a 3-4 defense because they've bought up just about every linebacker they could that was cheap and very affordable in the market. And then they double dip and go get some defensive linemen. And when they got Pat Sims from the Cincinnati Bengals, turned around and they made a nice move. I really like this move. Vance Walker, defensive tackle from the Atlanta Falcons. Here's a guy quietly playing some really good football in Atlanta. Got you 3 sacks last season and was really a menace on that defensive line. Raiders get him in the fold. He's a relatively young guy that can play, very talented. I like the move by the Raiders. So here goes the Raiders, making some quiet, sneaky moves, trying to better their franchise, better their roster. I like what the Raiders are doing. So the Raiders very active in free agency over the last part of the first week and into the second week. And again, a lot of these deals aren't for a lot of money, and that's the way the Raiders like to do it. So now we look at some quarterbacks that are switching teams. You look at Matthew Hasselbeck, a veteran quarterback that in a pinch can start 3 or 4 weeks for you. You saw that in the 2012 campaign when he had the Tennessee Titans playing arguably their best football of the season. They won 2 games in a row, looked like they were going to win a third before the Colts jumped up and bit them and really turned their season upside down. Now, ironic enough, he's going to play for that very Indianapolis Colts team that stopped his winning streak in the 2012 season. And it's funny, again, I talk about this all the time, how teams in the division admire your stuff from afar. They see it, they like what they see in your products from afar, and they said, hey, look, if that guy ever becomes available, why don't we take a stab at him? Here's an instance where the Tennessee Titans had Matthew Hasselbeck. He had to start a few games. He showed that he had something left in the tank. The Indianapolis Colts lose Drew Stanton to Arizona. He leaves to go with his ex-offensive coordinator, now new head coach in Arizona, and Bruce Arians does Drew Stanton. That leaves a void at backup quarterback for you. What do? You go right down the street in the division to Tennessee, and you pluck their backup quarterback, Matthew Hasselbeck. Smart move by the Indianapolis Colts. I love it. Here's a guy that's a veteran quarterback that has enough to get you through a 3-4 week stretch and not throw up all over himself. Keep you in contention until your starter comes back. I like the move. I think the Indianapolis Colts really upgraded their backup quarterback situation with the signing of Matthew Hasselbeck. Now you look at the Tennessee Titans. So Hasselbeck leaves. That leaves a void at backup quarterback for you. So what do? You go out and get a guy like Ryan Fitzpatrick, and you bring him into Tennessee. Smart move. Here's a guy that was a starter for the last 2 or 3 seasons. He's solid. And when he comes in the game, something's going to happen. Now, you don't know what that something is. It could be 3 touchdowns. It could be 3 interceptions. But something, and I guarantee you this, will occur. And that's what you got to love about Ryan Fitzpatrick. Something's going to happen. You're either going to benefit from it or you're really going to be kicking yourself. Either way, he's going to make something happen. And so now you have a very capable backup on your team in Ryan Fitzpatrick, and I think he's a really good backup. I think that's his niche in this league. He's not a starter. He's a perfect backup. If something were to go awry with Jake Locker, and we've seen Locker get injured several times early in his career, if he were to go down, you got a guy that can start for you, not just 4 games. He can start 6, 8 games for you. You don't want him to have to start that many games, but if you have to, you're perfectly fine with turning over your offense to Ryan Fitzpatrick. Like the move. Think it was a great acquisition by the Tennessee Titans. There you have it. So essentially, that's all I have for you in the lab room right now. I mean, a lot of little moves have been going on, but nothing noteworthy. And so we'll keep tracking these free agent moves. And again, stay tuned for all of the weekend review videos that I've put together. I'm starting to release them slowly one by one. Check out your division and see what I had to say about what happened in the first week of free agency with your team. And so check it out. They're being released on the channel as we speak. And so I thank you for joining me here in the lab room today. Again, not a lot to get to. Do want to tack on this quick extra point as that was a touchdown. And so The NFL's Rules Committee has been talking about potentially making it illegal for running backs to dip their head down and lead with the crown of their helmet, which is asinine because you have to protect yourself. It's instinct. If you have the football, it doesn't even matter. Running back, receiver, quarterback. If someone's coming to hit you at full speed, what's the first thing your body does as a reaction? You don't even control this. This is an impulse reaction. You see somebody running at you, you ball up. You can't help it. It's a physical reaction. And so I don't see how they can try to legislate that out of the game. And guys have spoken out about it already. Matt Forte has been very boisterous, as well as some ex-players like Marshall Faulk who think it's an absolute joke. This rule can't happen. I don't expect it to. I think this backlash from the league and players around it and people outside of the league, I think is going to be enough for people that vote on this type of thing to realize that, hey, this is really not a good rule. You can't ask a running back to just run with his head up. You're asking for running backs to get their chins busted up and to take some serious shots. You're trying to limit concussions. Well, I don't think having running backs run with their heads up is going to limit concussions. I think, in fact, it's going to help more concussions occur because you're basically having them expose their heads to blunt force trauma. And so no way is that a sound rule for the NFL to make. And so I think that's not going to happen. I also think that an 18-game schedule won't occur either because that is a terrible idea. I don't like it. I think that 16 games is more than enough. And they have talked about expanding the playoffs. I don't really like that idea either. I like it just the way it is, 12 teams. If you're not one of the best 12 teams, I don't need the playoffs watered down with more teams. Now, look, a 10 and 6 team can miss the playoffs, and you can think, hey, that's a really good team that just missed the show. Hey, if you didn't do enough to make it, we don't need to expand it so more teams can play. Be one of the best 12, one of the best 6 in your conference, in the discussion. And so that's the way I feel about that. I don't know what your take is on that, but that's the way I feel about that. Be one of the best 12, be one of the best 6 in your conference, and no need to have running backs have to run with their head up on a platter so that they can have it not slam off. I think the NFL should leave that rule the way it is. They need to adjust the pulling the challenge flag out and throwing it rule, though. It's been dubbed the Jim Schwartz rule after the Thanksgiving blunder that cost his team a touchdown, potentially the game. Again, they were really in control at that point. He doesn't challenge that play. The Texans don't get that touchdown. The Detroit Lions are still in the driver's seat in that game. Instead, Texans get a freebie, and they end up coming back and winning that game in overtime. So it's been dubbed the Jim Schwartz rule, and they need to change that because that's a very bad rule. Everything about instant replay is supposed to make the game better, and it's supposed to get calls right. And that, to me, is a direct objection to that. And so they need to change it. They will change it. And I think that's what they need to be focusing on in those meetings with the Rules Committee. And so that's going to do it for this edition of In the Lab Room. I thank you for joining me. You know all the ways to contact the show. Subscribe to the page if you haven't already done so. And again, have a good one. I will see you tomorrow.